And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, and joining me is Shayne Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. Shayne has been taking over in my absence. I've been out for several weeks now. Just got back from paternity leave, so it was nice to have a little bit of time off to refresh. And Shayne, I didn't really miss anything not having to cover the Steelers the past few weeks.
Yeah, I was gonna say a pre-show, but yeah, you picked a good time if you guys were gonna have that next kid. It was a good time to be out for a while, unfortunately. So
Yeah, I wasn't thinking that early on,
no,
but
no.
it ended up working out that way. So let's talk about this for a little bit. We're going to break down the Steelers' ugly losses here. We're going to talk about their matchup against the Colts this week on a Saturday, actually, and what that means for them in the rest of the season. And also our big discussion topic today is centered around head coach Mike Tomlin and what should the Steelers do with him this coming offseason. But first, Shayne, let's go ahead and start by talking about the ugly loss to the Patriots. They salvaged this game. It was a 21-18 loss at the end of the day. Wasn't as pretty as it appears on paper. For one thing, because you're playing a team that was a 2-win football team prior to this. They were 2-10 before they played the Steelers, just like the Cardinals were a 2-win football team. And not only that, but you got down 21-3 in this game early on. And I don't blame any fans that wanted to check out of that. That was ugly. It was disgusting. There's no other way to put it, really. This is the first time, Shayne, in the history of the Super Bowl era in the NFL where a team in week 10 or beyond has lost to 2-win teams in back-to-back, a team with a winning record. And so the Steelers are making history, not in the way that we want them to.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is something that I think, even though there's mixed results in terms of how true this is, I think this is one of those games or one of these two stretches where we feel like the Steelers are capable of this type of thing, right? Because we've talked all year about how they can't comfortably beat anybody. And that applies to everyone, as we found out, because not only can they not comfortably beat everybody, they can barely beat anybody lately, it feels like, right? They're just not a team that's cohesive in any way that they can rally together the last few weeks and make something happen. And you did mention, they kind of made this game a game at the end, but they still found a way to mess that up. They found a way to not be able to execute and get themselves a chance to tie this game or even win in that last drive. And I think everything that's gone wrong in the past 2 weeks is a microcosm of the issues this team has faced all year, right? It just finally blew up in their face because they didn't get the big play from, TJ Watt or Alex Highsmith or whoever, like that didn't come in these last couple games. And when it doesn't come, we see what this team looks like.
Yeah, and the problem there is right what you said, Shayne. They're so reliant on these splash plays and the stuff that's inconsistent from game to game, week to week. That's how they've been depending on getting some of these wins. You saw it back when they played the Browns. It required 2 takeaways, 2 defensive touchdowns in that game in order to pull it off. And so just fluky stuff like that. But when you're playing a team that averages 12.3 points on the season prior to playing Pittsburgh, I mean, just a bottom of the barrel dumpster fire. Like at times it almost was like Robert Kraft was telling them, guys, don't win this game.
Yeah, seriously.
We'd rather have the draft. We'd rather have Drake May next year. And so the Steelers did everything to fight back. The problem is, as much as they wanted it, and whether or not you can argue, I don't know. I can't speak for any of the Patriots players and how determined they were to win that game. They all have jobs. They don't want to keep their jobs, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the organization in general, I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of, secretly wanted to throw that one a little bit because of what is on the line here, being a bad football team and moving on at the quarterback position, which they clearly already have from the guy they drafted in the first round, Mac Jones. They're moving on from Bill Belichick reportedly, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. And so they want to hit that reset button.
Yeah.
This was such an important game for the Steelers in terms of the standings, because now you've got 6 teams in the AFC alone that are tied with a 7-6 record. Somehow the Steelers, because of their divisional records, they are still sitting in 6th place in this division after losing back-to-back games against 2-win football teams prior to playing them. 3 wins now. So not a good game. Anything else that you want to highlight from this? Winners and losers, like we typically do winners and losers here. Shayne, did the Steelers have winners in a game like this?
I mean, offensively, I really don't think so. I think both running backs really struggled against this really top-tier run defense. And that's something I highlighted going into this game on the show I did, after the Cardinals loss, was could they maintain their rushing attack against a team that was giving up barely 3 yards a carry? And the answer was a resounding no, right? And it wasn't that they didn't run the ball at all. Obviously, they did have to pass late because they were down 21-3 to a team that normally can't score 20 points. But it still was not effective at all. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, neither one were even remotely effective on the ground. So those two certainly were losers on the game. Not saying that they were by themselves just bad. It was just the line couldn't block these guys. And I think winners, I thought Cam had a pretty good day as a run defender. I thought Landon Roberts played very well coming off his groin injury, showing up for Thursday night and really playing well, forced the interception that Michael Walker got. So I think that ultimately, again, in a game like this against a 2-10 team, you can't really say there's a winner, in my opinion, because of the fact that we lost to that team. But there were some guys who really seemed like they were fighting for it out there. So.
Yeah, there were. It's hard to pick a few names out of the crowd because I don't feel like anybody stood out particularly. Typically, we're talking about Watt and Highsmith. Both of those guys suffered concussions early in the game. And so,
insane.
Oh my goodness. The whole TJ Watt thing is just so bizarre how that played out. The guy got just whiplash, kicked in the head early in the game, goes and he's getting smelling salts on the sidelines. And then he gets the dark visor on. And nobody notices that all this is happening. And then he comes back in the game and looks like a shell of himself, not really getting after the quarterback. Just his worst game of the season, I think. And so, and I don't know why, Shayne, I was on paternity, but I went back and watched that game a second time. It wasn't worth doing. So there weren't a lot of people to know. On the loser side of things, however, as bad as Trubisky was in this game, this could have been so much worse. He should have had 3 interceptions in the first quarter. Like there were, just dropped picks in that game. I don't know what he's seeing. He's got the tunnel vision. Shayne, I'm old enough that I used to play the Madden that had like the
Q6, I think bar. It was the vision code.
Yeah, and I think we might have mentioned this before, but Trubisky's doesn't exist. Like it's so narrow that
it's pretty much just a flashlight, basically.
So, that's the thing is, only a couple times did he target passes down the field in this game, and reflected in his 5.4 yards an attempt. Just an ugly performance by him, by the offense. I thought Mikel Walker these past 2 weeks has just been humiliated in pass coverage, and it's hard. He's in a tough situation. You lose the top 2 linebackers, the guy who's supposed to be your coverage guys.
Yeah.
But Walker's just not getting the job done out there at all, and it just creates just yet another weakness in the passing game for the Steelers. They already had bad cornerback play outside of Porter and bad safety play to deal with on top of that. And so the middle of the field has been wide open these past 2 weeks, but those are, I think, the biggest losers kind of that I would take away from this past week. Anything else you want to note there, Shayne?
Not specifically. There's a couple comments here that I wanted to get to while we have a chance. We'll talk about this more in a second, but our good friend here, our Barley 18 always shows up. Thanks for showing up. Send Tomlin to Carolina or Washington to get a couple picks. See if anyone would give a 3 or 4 for Kenny. Possibly look to move TJ, let him have a real chance. Time to burn it down and rebuild culture. We kind of know that this isn't going to probably be the way they go about it. I understand the thought process with Tomlin. I think if you do decide to move on from him, trying to trade him in his last year under contract next year would make some sense. There's a couple teams I could see liking him as kind of that, like you said, you bring him in to help build culture up a little bit. Kenny, he's going to be the quarterback next year. I think we all kind of know that at this point, especially with the injury. They want to get another look at him. And then TJ, as much as I'd love to see him have a real chance, he's going to be a Steeler probably for life. It feels like a Steeler lifer type of guy. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. What do you think, Tommy?
Yeah, I think that you're right. Unfortunately, not unfortunately to everything that you just said, but to some of this here, and you hit it right here with the comment, like Carolina, Washington, these teams could use head coaches. Yeah. They would be great fits. I think that they would both love to have a coach like Mike Tomlin. And personally, and this is what we're going to talk about in a little bit here, I'm open to the idea for sure. And so the problem with Carolina is like I think they're 2 years out with first round picks now because of the Bryce Young trade, which is looking horrendous.
Yeah, I think they have their first next year, but not this year. I forget, but yeah, something like that.
It might be. I thought it was 3 total.
I think they gave them 2 firsts, and then it was a couple other picks, and DJ Moore was kind of that.
Maybe that's what it was. I'm getting that confused, but. So you have to be a little bit patient.
If Moore wasn't in the trade, it would have been 3 firsts, but they gave them.
All right. Yeah. I think you're right there. Okay. And as far as the Kenny thing goes, Most likely, you're right, Shane.
Yeah.
He's probably going to be the guy that's there. He was the guy they spent a first round pick on.
Right.
What I would be interesting to note is how much say do Omar Khan and Andy Weidel have? These are your new GMs here. These are your new heads of the front office. They did not draft Kenny Pickett. That was a Kevin Colbert pick. And what we've seen in the past 5 years of Kevin Colbert was made a lot of poor decisions when it came to the draft. And so I don't know how much pull they will have. I know that Tomlin is that head honcho there. And as long as Tomlin is there, Tomlin is like the say all end all type of guy. And so I would be interested to see. And obviously, I mean, we know we can't ignore the elephant in the room that Pickett has not been good these first 2 years and certainly not been productive. I mean, the productivity is like in the 0 percentile among quarterbacks over these past 2 years that have been starting in equal or more games that Pickett has. So let's talk about Kenny Pickett for a second here. Out in week 15, obviously had the ankle surgery. Don't know when exactly we will see him again, if he'll make an appearance here before the end of the season. That timetable is kind of vague there from what I understand. Have you ever heard any updates on that at all? I did not get a chance to listen to Tomlin's press conference.
No, not unless if he did give an update in that. I didn't get a chance to watch either before it came on. But as far as I understand, the timeline would put him week 18 at the earliest. So if we have a chance still to make the playoffs, which, we'll talk a little bit about that here soon as well, I think. But assuming that's a game that's meaningful, he should be, I think, able to go week 18 probably. Like, I think if it's a game that is important, he'll probably play. I honestly, at this point, because I don't think we're going to make the playoffs, but especially if we don't have a real chance at it, I'd rather let him sit if he is going to be the guy next year. Like I said, just don't put him back out there and give him a chance to hurt himself again, because between the offensive line play and his decision making in terms of when he wants to scramble and run around, like he's put himself in harm's way a lot this year. And I think at this point it might be best to just let him sit. And again, if there's a chance we can make the playoffs, I certainly would rather have him in there, even as unproductive as he's been. I will certainly take him over Mr. Trubisky if he's able to play. So that's kind of where
I can kind of see that one both way, honestly, Shane.
Yeah.
And even if the Steelers, they go into week 18 against Baltimore, a tough team, and you are eliminated from the playoffs, I still think that if Pickett is, I mean, if he's healthy, if he's ready to go,
like
if he's healthy, that's right. If he's healthy, man, I want to see one more thing from him. I think that I know what my answer would be already, but I want the Steelers to know what I think that I know, if that makes any sense. So I just don't want them to, waste another year. And this is what I really worry about this, Shane, with this team, because we have seen this organization and this head coach stick with guys through thick and thin, like Jarvis Jones, like Artie Burns, guys that they were drafted high, but it didn't matter. You could tell pretty early in their careers that it wasn't cutting it. I know a lot of people have more hope for Kenny. I think that you have more hope probably than I do for Kenny, Shane. And I want him to be able to be that guy. I had him 48th on my board. I wasn't high on him to begin with. He wasn't my top quarterback in that class. He wasn't even the top quarterback on the consensus board. If this tells you anything about that quarterback class, Malik Willis actually finished as the number 1 quarterback on the consensus board. And that guy is going to have a hard time finding an NFL roster, I think, for the remainder of his career. And it just shows you how bad this quarterback class really was. And I think that a lot of us, we'd like to try to ignore that at the time, but it's catching up with us now. Anyway, ranting on here, Trubisky is going to be starting this week. Is that the right decision, Shane? Are you on the Mason Rudolph train at this point? You're like, all right, better than nothing, better than what we've seen from Mitch at this point. I know that if you go back and look at the circumstances that Rudolph was dealing with in 2019 when he did start, he had a winning record. He did it with James Washington as the leading receiver on the team that year, and didn't exactly have a great supporting cast on offense. All that to say, both of these guys, I mean, we've seen enough from both of them, right? But who would you pick to go in this game?
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of conversation about this, and I talked about it a couple times in the last couple shows I've done. I think the problem ultimately is when people talk about this, especially because I saw a couple people from other Steelers sites chime in on this, saying about like how you could even consider benching Trubisky for a guy like Mason makes no sense and all this other stuff. I'm like, the problem with Mitch is he's one of those backups that can actively harm your chances of winning a game. Where I think Mason isn't probably going to drastically impact your chances of winning, but I do trust him to not throw the game away. more than I expect Mitch to. And I think with a team like this and an offense that's already bad, Mitch is not elevating anything. I'm sorry. This offense is not being elevated by him in any way. It wasn't elevated by Pickett really that much either. I mean, his one start in this offense without Canada was the best we've seen from him, but it's not like this offense is going to be putting up 25, 28 points regardless, right? Give me the guy who I trust is going to just go through his reads, make a solid decision most of the time, and actually when an opportunity to throw the ball down the field comes his way, he will take it and probably do it more accurately than Mitch will. That's what this comes down to. This is not a glowing endorsement of Mason. Like people like myself who are saying he should play.
Oh, yeah.
This is not me being like, oh, yeah, he should have been starting the whole time. Mitch is legitimately unplayable in the NFL right now. I think that's the level of play we're getting from him. It's the level of play we've gotten from him as a Steeler for the most part, outside of a few glimpses like the Bucs game last year, stuff like that. He is not a starting quarterback in the NFL. And now Mason isn't either, but I think he is a more capable backup at this point than Mitch has shown to be. And that's really important for a team that's just looking for something they can lean on offensively in the passing game. And right now, Mitch isn't giving them that.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I have never been on board from the very beginning until now. Mason Rudolph is not a franchise quarterback. I mean, I didn't ever think at any point that he would be. And those saying, oh, Mason's finally going to get a shot. No, that window has closed. That ship has sailed. He had a chance to sign with other teams, and teams didn't even want him as their backup quarterback this year. Again, it's not a knock on Mason. I think as a mid-third round pick, that's a fine selection. You're getting a guy who served his purpose and came in and helped the Steelers in 2019. But he's not a franchise quarterback either. He's not the option this team needs. He just might be a better option than Mitch because of the reasons you mentioned. Like Mitch is making such careless and bad decisions with the football. He doesn't see the field well. Even when the pocket is good, Shayne, he's been standing back 3-4 seconds and just tucks and runs. I mean, he just has tunnel vision that way. And so you could certainly make a case. You can argue that Mason would be the better man for the job this week based on the sample, albeit small. What we've seen from Mitch this year has been disgusting. I mean, just the worst quarterback play out there right now. I mean, and that's what's sad, Shayne, is the fact that guys like Tommy DeVito right now are just blowing every Steelers quarterback out of the water, despite their past reputations and 2 first-round picks and those guys. And it just doesn't matter. And I think that I don't know if it moves the needle either way. I guess at the end of the day, I don't know that if Vegas found out that if Mason was starting, I'm not sure if the game line
they probably move it in the Colts' favor just because of the perception of Mason Rudolph and the fact that he hasn't been able to get a chance. But I just, again, like if your goal is to win a game, if you're trying to make the playoffs still, which obviously they are, I just don't trust Mitch to not throw the game away against a team that's even sort of good. Like the Colts have been really solid this year. They have their issues. They're starting Gardner Minshew, quarterback, who's very hit or miss. They're missing Jonathan Taylor. We'll talk about that. Like, there's a lot of issues with that team. They are still significantly more like a better team than us so far this year, in my opinion. When you look at all the underlying statistics, the overall numbers of things, they're a better football team. And I think Mason gives you a better chance because again, I just think he's not going to throw the game to the other team. I really don't expect him to do that. And if he does, like you can go to Mitch. Yeah. It's just again, like Mitch is supposed to be the higher upside guy in the situation, right? But he has no way to realize it because, like you said, he doesn't see the field. Like he can't take shots whenever he doesn't see them. And the one shot he got that was sort of completable was the 4th and 2 shot, and he didn't hit it. Like you have to hit that if you're going to throw that. Like for him to do that, like that's one thing I want to talk about before you even get into the next part here. That 4th and 2 play was horrendous. Unbelievable decision, unbelievable call for that situation. You need 3 yards. There's
such a low percentage.
There's a lot of plays, as we know, there's a lot of Steelers plays in the playbook that can get you 3 yards. Not many that can get you more than that, but there's definitely a lot that can get you 3 yards. The fact that that's the call, if that was the 3rd and 2 play, I could live with it because you're trying to get them off guard. They're looking short, whatever. You cannot afford to put the ball 30, 40 yards down the field on 4th and 2. I'm sorry. You can't do it. Not when you're a quarterback like Mitch that just isn't going to hit that throw all the time. You know, if Mahomes does it or Josh, I'm like, all right, I get it. Still bad decision, but I understand the thought process. Mitch is not doing this consistently. And I don't know. That's where I'm at with it.
No, I agree. I mean, I was infuriated by it at the time because it just made no sense. I mean, such a low percentage of trying to convert right there in such a crucial moment of the game. So I mean, in terms of who should start this week, I really don't care.
Yeah, I
I just
mean,
don't know if I don't know if it's going to make a difference. I would raise my hand if somebody took a poll, I'd raise my hand for Mason Rudolph. Why not? Why not?
That's pretty much what it is. Yeah,
so, but I do think that you're probably right, Shayne. I think that the Steelers, because their passing concepts suck and because their quarterback play isn't up to snuff, you probably are best just playing game managing football. I hate that kind of style.
yeah,
I hate it.
with,
I don't think you can win
especially
you
with
Super
Kenny
Bowl.
out, like let Mason
But I
do
think
that,
it truly is probably your best chance to beat the Colts.
Yeah.
And specifically, if you talk about this team, play good defense. If they can do that with how banged up they are right now. And so we'll see what happens. We're going to get to that a little bit later here. We got a comment from Matt here. Hey, guys, I listened to a few of your episodes and enjoy them. Happy to join live. Thanks,
Yes,
Matt. Thanks for having you here. Tell your friends about it. If you like the show, let's try to raise awareness of it, because Shayne and I love doing this. We obviously put a lot of effort into everything Steelers, and I cover full time. And I know Shayne essentially does as well with everything you do. And you do the, what's the other thing that you do?
PSF.
The live.
There's a PSF. It's called Pro Sports Fans app. I do live shows, like live game day commentary throughout the season as well. So you can look that up as well on iOS and Android. So.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. The Still Curtain podcast is running a deposit match promotion up to $100 for any new Sleeper Daily Fantasy user. Make sure you use the code FANSIDED2 when signing up to receive your deposit match. Please remember to always game responsibly. Scan the QR code on the screen to see if you qualify. All right, Shayne, let's move on to our next discussion topic here. I want to talk about Bill Belichick in the New England Patriots. There's a report from The Score that came out just recently that said the Patriots are in fact going to move on from their 71-year-old head coach during the 2024 offseason. Obviously, Belichick has a tremendous reputation in the coaching world, not just NFL, just one of the greatest coaches in sports history. After all the accolades he's had over all of the years, you can say, all right, a lot of that's attributed to Tom Brady, whatever. It's hard to separate the coach from the players. They both kind of go hand in hand. I don't think anybody's going to sit here and say that Belichick wasn't a great coach. And so as good as he is, and as good as he was winning these Super Bowls for the New England Patriots, the stretch that he has, I mean, 3 times the accolades of a guy like Mike Tomlin, quite literally, they are still ready to move on from him. And him and Robert Kraft's relationship, after everything, they understand that there's a time and a place for everything. And they think that it's time to move on from Bill Belichick, despite all he's done for this franchise. You can see, obviously, the Steelers aren't quite in as big a shambles as what the Patriots are right now with the 3-10 record, all that kind of stuff. Although you can argue that maybe having that record can set them up a little bit faster for a reboot than where the Steelers are in the middle of the pack. That's besides the point. But what I do want to talk about, Shayne, because this is a discussion topic that's heating up, and I think rightfully so. Should Mike Tomlin not only be in the hot seat for next year, but if you were in charge, and if you were the Rooneys, because I don't even think that Con and Weidl have that kind of power. Tomlin is over them in the pecking order because of seniority and everything he's done for the franchise. If you were the Rooneys right now, would you consider trading Mike Tomlin? And I think that would be the option here, where you're not just going to flat out terminate his contract. Somebody's going to be a suitor. There are going to be teams that want this guy because of what he's done. Would you be willing to trade Mike Tomlin to move on from him in 2024? What would your answer be? How would you reply to that?
So let me start by talking about Bill Belichick a little bit, because we started with that. I think with Bill, I just want to throw this out there, that the reason why Bill Belichick is probably going to lose his job and no longer be the Patriots head coach is because of the GM, Bill Belichick. That's ultimately what's going to be his downfall.
Yeah.
Because he's the czar of that team. He does everything. He handles drafting, he handles coaching, he sets everything up for that franchise. His inability to draft well, really for most of his tenure, if we're being honest about it, most of the time that he's been the GM, the drafting has been an issue. They've had to pull players from other teams. They've had to trade for players, usually working out, but giving up late round picks for random players and making them work. Like, That was his bread and butter. He's great at doing that. Once the guy's already in the league, he can like, oh, that's one of my guys. We can go get him.
Yeah. Yep.
It's his inability to draft receivers, especially the swing and miss on Mac Jones. That's ultimately going to be what loses him his job. Now with Tomlin, I think one of the problems and one of the reasons why it's not as likely that this happens, and I'll get to my answer on it in a second still, is he hasn't bottomed out quite yet. Now, it feels like we're on that track this year. If he loses out, then that conversation changes a lot. But I think because he hasn't bottomed out like the Patriots have, because he hasn't had the losing seasons like the Patriots have had a couple times the last few years, it's harder, I think, for the ownership to look at it the same way that Robert Kraft is probably looking at it right now. And looking into the future, being like, is this the guy for the long haul at this point? And obviously, there's the age thing too, where Bill is getting older, and at some point things are going to switch for him, where he's not quite as good at managing the game and stuff like that. But ultimately, with Tomlin, I think for me, my decision at this point, and my answer to what you asked would be that I think for both sides, weirdly enough, I think it's time. I think for both sides, if they want to accomplish what the goal always is in this sport, both of them need to do it somewhere else. I think Tomlin, if given an opportunity with a roster that has a quarterback, especially, has somebody that they can rely on. I look at the Chargers. That's the team I'm most
I
curious
was just going
about
to say that.
because you have Justin Herbert, regardless of what people say about him, he's a top 7 quarterback on a bad day. Like that's where he is as a player.
Mm-hmm.
You give him a defense that, yes, has had its issues, but probably just needs a new face of that defense, needs a couple new players to come in to help bring that thing around. That's the type of team that I think if you send him to, he could have a lot of the same success he had early on with the Steelers. And for the Steelers, I think it's time to move on simply because things seem to be stale to me. I don't think that message that he's always conveyed is getting through to these players the same way it used to. And maybe that's on the players to a certain degree. Maybe that's on the players who we've chosen to bring in. You look at some of the situations with the receivers last few years, obviously, and you look at just how the team has performed in certain situations. It might just not be getting through to them. And I think for both sides of this coin, they do need a refresh. They need something kind of new. And I'll be honest, I've said this before to people. I've said it in our chat. I'm sure you've seen it. As much as I am on that coin or on that side of the coin, I think you are too. And we'll let you talk about it in a second. I do want people to understand that as good as the Steelers have been at hiring coaches, we've had 3 in the last 50 plus years. Okay. This is not normal. Teams don't do this. I want everybody to be prepared for the very high likelihood that we are a worse team and have a worse head coach next year if we do this. It's probably not going to be the first try, realistically. Mm-hmm. This is not the same Steelers that hired Mike Tomlin in 2007. This is not the same franchise that it was at that point in time. The same people aren't necessarily running it, obviously, with the Rooney family switching things up with different people passing. But I think be prepared for a rocky start to a new era. But I do think it's something that probably has to happen now sooner than later, rather sooner than later.
Yeah, I think it's good to give that warning out here to fans too as well, because I recall just a couple of years ago when we said we couldn't get worse than Randy Fichtner. We couldn't get worse.
Yeah, you could always get worse. Let me tell you that.
There's always room to go down. So yes, you could get worse for Mike Tomlin. Is Tomlin the best coach in the league anymore? I don't think so. I mean, I think that he's removed himself from being in that discussion. However, like you said, there are bad coaches out there in the NFL that just don't know what they're doing. He at least has the experience. He at least gets his guys to come downhill, usually tackle well. The tackling was disgusting this past game. So
Ezekiel Elliott shouldn't be breaking tackles at this point.
No. I want to back up, Shayne, on what you're talking about, the GM side of things a little bit. And I worry, this is one of the things I worry about with Tomlin. Like anytime a guy stays this long and gets this powerful, I mean, you become like Emperor Palpatine out here. And it's like, you can do whatever you want. And and this is what scares me is I know the guys, I know very well the guys that Tomlin liked in the NFL draft.
Yeah.
And he has personally, I think, went out and made it a point to get some of those guys, a Patrick Peterson, a William Jackson the year before. And we're all scratching our heads at that one with the contract situation and the injury and everything. So Miles Jack, he liked Miles Jack a lot. All these guys have sucked. And it's not to say that Tomlin is bad at evaluating all talent, but I think that Tomlin has went and got guys and had his hand in the basket, at least, of going out and getting guys far after the fact when they're no longer good football players. And that is one thing that has really bothered me about what the Steelers have done in free agency over the last 5 years of Mike Tomlin and Kevin Colbert. It's hard to say where is that balance, how much of it was Colbert, how much was Tomlin, but these guys were on the scouting trail together every single year. Tomlin has schools that he likes to draft from, and he doesn't hide his interest very well. And so I think that Tomlin could be a part of the problem with what the Steelers have been doing in the draft. And I don't know whose idea it is to say, let's plug a hole or let's draft for need, but it's mainly just been, let's plug holes. Let's take guys that we need at positions that we need. And it's been really bad for them prior to this last draft. I mean, 2017 was good. And then from 2018 to 2022, that's a slew of garbage right there with a few good picks in between. And I think it's why the franchise is in the situation that it's in right now. And so that would be something that I would point to. Shayne, I want to pose this to you. If you seem like you and I kind of both on board, maybe making this happen. We don't think the Steelers will, obviously, but if you were in charge here, what would you do with Tomlin? Would you trade him away? And then what would be the head coach, ideally, in a perfect scenario, that you would like to hire? Do you have anybody in place you would like to hire?
I'll let you handle your friend there. So I think I do try to trade Mike, because ultimately there's going to be teams out there. There's always the conversation about people saying, "Oh, if you let Mike Tomlin go, he's going to get scooped up." It's like, yeah, probably. And I'm not saying he's a bad coach. I think a lot of people are trying to say he's a bad coach, and I think they're wrong. I think the problem is he's not the right coach for us currently, and I don't think he is into the future at this point. I think if you're hiring somebody, I mean, obviously the hot one is Ben Johnson from the Lions offense coordinator. He's the hot name, right? That's the one that you look at and you're like, okay, everybody's going to be interested in that guy.
Yep.
The problem, and this is kind of why I'm saying with the head coach situation, that, hey, if we do fire Tomlin or trade him or do whatever we do, whoever we bring is probably not going to be as good of a coach. One, historically speaking, just isn't likely, but also just because there's not a lot of candidates that I think look at this job. As much as the Steelers job should be a huge commodity, because it doesn't come open literally ever, pretty much. How many of the top coaches are going to come in and look at this, be like, yeah, this is a good time for me to come deal with this team? Like, I really don't think they're going to attract the names that people would expect them to attract. And more importantly, the Steelers are cheaper than I think people realize. I don't think they're going to want to pay a coach the type of contract that the top coaches are going to get. It's probably going to be some retread or a young guy who has almost no experience doing this type of thing, similar to Mike Tomlin, where he was a coordinator, obviously, but didn't have any head coaching experience or anything like that. It's probably going to be either a shot in the dark or a retread head coach, and either one isn't going to inspire a ton of confidence, I don't think, right? Like that's the other thing that you have to think about with this. As much as it'd be great to get Ben Johnson, I don't expect one of those types of coaches to come here.
Yeah, and the other thing that's a little concerning to me, Shayne, is we are living right now in an offense-dominated league. Like, if you don't have an offense, you're not going to compete. And I think that there's a stat that every team over the last decade has had a top 7 offense or better that has won the Super Bowl. And so you have to be able to score points in this league, especially with the way the rules are right now. The Steelers now have a 90-year history of defensive head coaches. They love their defensive head coaches. They go right from one to the next. And so would they even be willing to kind of change that philosophy? It's outdated in my mind. I think there's a couple really good defensive head coaches in the NFL, but even look how stale Sean McDermott looks already. I mean, that offense is really wavered. And I think Josh Allen's kind of the glue that's holding that team together. And so I think that you can make it work theoretically if you pair that defensive minded coach with a really good offensive coordinator. The problem with that, Shayne, is that guy will get snatched within a year or two. Like look at Bobby Slowick already with DeMeco Ryans. Like, Ryans is doing he did the right thing by hiring him. That Shanahan understudy, who he obviously worked with, he knew how good he was. But Slowick could be gone, and then we could see what the Texans look like without him. It obviously helps that you have CJ Stroud. So don't get me wrong. That's a big part of it. But look at how Mike McDaniel revived Tua's career. Look at the offense. They're scoring 30+ points a game. I mean, it is almost a requirement in today's NFL to have an innovative offensive mind running that ship. And if you don't have that, Shayne, your team is not going to be on par with these others that can't score, that you got to be able to score points. And that's been the biggest problem. The Steelers every year since 2018, they've just gone downhill, and it's gotten progressively worse to the point where now you're legitimately averaging like 15 offensive points per game this season. You take away their 2 defensive scores and their special team score this year. So I think that my preference would be dream scenario here. The Steelers trade Mike Tomlin for a first-round pick. I think you can get a first-round pick because of the pedigree of Mike Tomlin, what he has accomplished, and theoretically how fast he could potentially turn a franchise like Washington around that's just kind of stockpiled a few more picks right before the deadline. If you were to do something like that, or to go with the team, like you said, the Chargers, that have you've got your quarterback in place. You don't have to worry about the draft side of things
key
in terms of finding that guy. You can get your defense to play a lot tougher and a lot better because they've spent just so many resources and so much money on that defense. They should be better than what they are. So I think that's another a good landing spot for him potentially. So I would ship him off, and I would like to get a first round pick. If I get a second, I'm content with that. Yeah. Honestly, at this point, I'm content with that because, like you said, I think the Steelers are stale anyway. So I would trade Tomlin, and Ben Johnson would be my hire of choice. And if you haven't looked at a lot of Lions tape this year, I think Ben Johnson is brilliant. I think he has a chance to be that next Mike McDaniel, that next, dare I say, Kyle Shanahan type guy, because he has taken that offense in 2 years' time and made it one of the top 3 or 4 offenses in the league. He's averaging 400 yards per game. To put that into perspective, the Steelers have won 400-yard game of offense in their last 61 games now. And so, and it just came a few games ago in the first game as with Eddie Faulkner's offensive coordinator. The fact that they can average that many, that you can be one of the top scoring teams in the league, and you're doing it with guys like Josh Reynolds, you revive Jared Goff's career. Like, I think that Ben, if you watch his passing concepts, like, he is a mastermind at getting these guys open, at utilizing the middle of the field. Like, I really like everything that he does. So that would be my preference. There are several other candidates that I like out there. We can go into more detail on that maybe in the offseason. I won't touch on that too long right now, but that is my vote. If you guys would like to keep Tomlin, if you'd like to trade him, go ahead and comment in the chat section here if you're live with us, and we'd like to see what you have to say. Some of you have already voiced your opinion on that as well. All right, if you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and would like to support the Steel Curtain Podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain Podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shayne, we're going to wrap things up here with our Steelers versus Colts Week 15 preview. The Steelers are playing Saturday afternoon, part of that new flex rule that they have this year. And so Week 15 already, we're getting a Saturday game for the Steelers. So they're going from Thursday to Saturday, not necessarily a short week for them. It's actually a little bit longer than a typical Sunday to Sunday week, but still a kind of an unusual scheduling there. They actually favored the Steelers. They favored this Steelers game because over the 3 other options, which were terrible, by the way. And I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but they had some other options to flex into that spot. Nothing worth watching at all. I think that probably the most intriguing one was like the Chiefs and Patriots, just because Patrick Mahomes is playing and Taylor Swift, or whatever else is going to happen during. There were no good games. There were no good games, and so Colts and Steelers are tied at 7-6. As ugly as this game might look, and as bad as the quarterback play might be in this contest, this was the best one to flex into that spot, and so and that's why when they initially released the schedule, the Steelers didn't have a time and date set out. They were waiting for this moment to see. And it's going to be the Steelers on Saturday at 4:30 p.m. They're going to be playing in Indy. I know the Steelers have not lost a game there since like 2008. I think they've been really good on the road in Indy. Obviously, completely different team than we had going back that far, back when the Steelers had their legit defense and everything else. Ben Roethlisberger. Talk about Steelers odds here for a second. Steelers are 2.5-point road underdogs against Gardner Minshew and the Colts. Does that seem like a fair line for you, Shayne?
Yeah, I mean, the Colts have done a really good job. I think Shane Steichen is firmly in the Coach of the Year race. I think honestly, I think it might come down to how good some of the other teams, the top teams, finish, and if one of those teams are worthy of it. Like Kyle Shanahan's probably going to be in there, obviously, too, with his job with the 49ers. But he's going to be one of those candidates for sure, and they've been able to make it work without their rookie quarterback, who honestly early in the year looked really, really good for what was considered a raw prospect coming out of Florida with Anthony Richardson. So honestly, this is one of those games where if we were fully healthy, I would probably still be leaning Colts. They've just been a better coach team this year. They've been able to make better things happen. So for us to only be just barely road under, and we're on the road, so really it's almost a pick 'em if it was a neutral site. I think it's probably more fair to the Steelers than the Colts, if I'm being honest about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. It probably is in this case. I think the line is probably set right around where I would. It's hard to go too much the other way
Yeah,
when Steelers can't score.
yeah,
And so it is fortunate though that they get this team without Anthony Richardson, without Jonathan Taylor's
yes,
doubtful this week. And
yes.
so it early on, like if you would have said they're gonna be missing two of your most important players on your team to the success of this team anyway, I would have thought that the Steelers would be favored in this game, but that is not the case, and you can see why now with everything Pittsburgh is dealing with. It's just hard to be favored in a game when you can't score, and so I think that's pretty fair. Over under set at 42
That
this
feels
week.
high.
Shayne, I lost
Did
money.
you?
I can be honest. I lost a little bit of money. I don't ever bet big,
Right.
but I bet a few bucks last week. I took the under
As a
when
lot of
it
people
was
did.
32 and a
As a
half.
lot of
And I'm
people
like,
did.
how is this even
Yeah.
32 and a half? Like the Steelers score 15 a game, the Patriots score 12 a game. It's going to be like one of those 9-6 type games or something. And of course, the Steelers let up 21
Yeah, like
points like in the
immediately,
first
essentially.
quarter and change.
Yes.
So yeah, didn't get that one, but 42 is the over under for this game. Again, I think that's pretty reasonable considering. And you talked about it already, Shane. I mean, the Colts don't have star power. That's not really their thing, but they do have a pretty well balanced roster. They've got good offensive tackles. They've got they just don't have the gaping holes like the
Right.
Steelers do. And I think that's the difference between these two teams. I mean, Gardner Minshew, I don't think is playing exceptionally well or anything that way, but I do think he sees the field better than your Trubisky does. And so he can manage that offense better than Trubisky can for the Steelers. So I think that's an advantage that they would have as well in this game. What to watch for? We talked about Richardson and Jonathan Taylor a little bit. Colts have good offensive tackle pairing. I mean, Braden Smith and Bernard Ryman. I think those guys have both been better than
Oh,
expected.
yeah.
I mean, they're both grading out top 8 tackles in the NFL in terms of Pro Football Focus right now. And so I don't know what the status is going to be. I don't know at this point what the status is going to be on those guys. They're in protocol. They practice limitedly, so I would assume that they're going to be ready to go, even though this is a Saturday game here that we're talking about. Steelers played on Thursday, obviously, so a little bit of time to recoup
Right.
there. But you got a clear protocol, and we'll see what happens. Even if Watt and Highsmith are out there for this week, this is not an easy matchup, especially going against a smart coach and one who's going to know where Watt and Highsmith line up every single time with good offensive tackles to boot. And so I don't know if this is one that on those two pass rushers for the Steelers getting the best of their opponent in this one.
No, I think that even if these two play, this is going to be one of those games. It's going to be very hard to pressure Minshew, and I think he will pressure himself at times for this team. I will say that he does have a bit of that in him, where he is going to try to kind of move around. Sometimes it's not the best thing to do, but just winning off the snap, I don't expect a whole lot of that from these guys, even if they do play. I hesitate to say like at this point, if they are in the concussion protocol and they're not 100% good to go. Is this a game you just go out and see if you can get something from Golden and Herbig and just hope that it's enough? Because I don't want to see them obviously suffer another one or be in a situation where
Yeah.
they're at risk for more. Because we've seen this team, they've had concussion issues. Last year it was Pat and Kenny. Like, I don't want to see that as much as we need this game. We really do. Because this is
Yeah.
one of those teams that's in that thick of it, right? Like they need this game. We need this game. At this point, though, like I'm obviously going to root for this team to win every time they play. But I also kind of feel like it might be in the best interest of the franchise if we just continue to get smacked around and just prove that we need to make some big changes. So I think either way, there's good that can come out of this game. But I do agree, though, that it probably isn't going to be the pass rush that wins this game for us so if we do win it.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you there, Shane. I don't think there's any sense of putting your players, some of your best players at
Two of our
risk
best, yeah.
for a game like this. The Steelers are minus 40 in point differential. I think that's like 23rd, 24th in the league. And so
Somewhere around there.
they're just not good enough to jeopardize the health of your players or to put them in that situation. And even if they were healthy, Shane, even if they were healthy, Watt and Highsmith are playing way too many snaps. Like you guys need to use
absolutely.
a rotation. I understand how good they can be, but they get less good, I think, a little bit every game because you wearing them down so much that you play 66, 68, 71 snaps. The wheels are going to completely fall off of these guys by the end of the season. Even if you were to somehow hold on to this spot and make the playoffs right now. And so you're going to get nothing out of those guys in the postseason if you keep up at this rate. Like, they have the worst rotation rate in the NFL when it comes to their pass rushers. And you can't do that. Even great teams, even a team like the Dallas Cowboys, who has Micah Parsons, probably going to win Defensive Player of the Year this year, they rotate the guy in and out of the lineup. Watt has played like 150 more snaps than what Parsons has this year. It's insane. And so you have to find the right balance. You should be able to trust Marcus Golden a little bit. I think Golden's been solid when he's been in there. You should be able to trust Herbig a little bit. I think that
Herbig has made some plays when he's
been really splashy in really limited action. So even if those guys didn't show a lot when they come in the game, you still need to play them because you have to give these guys rest. It is a very physically demanding position. And you're not just going to wear them out for this year. You're going to make their careers end faster. And that's an unfortunate thing. So especially when you have a guy on a Hall of Fame track like TJ Watt. So find the balance there. This is not the game that I would say, I'm going to shove you in there. You're going to be out there every play, because you're going against good tackles. You're going against a team that probably does know how to handle these two guys, especially coming off of just being banged up and being in concussion protocol. So I don't think that I would risk it personally. We'll see what the Steelers decide to do here and whether or not it proves to be the right decisions. Anything else that you want to add in things to watch for in this contest, Shayne?
Michael Pittman. He's a tough ask for this secondary because Joey's probably going to get him. He's physical enough to deal with his size and everything, but if Joey's not on him, it's going to be a tough cover. This guy has really shown out this year as a really good player, and he's the type of player that worries me because, again, I don't think anyone else in the secondary except for Porter can handle his physicality. So I definitely watch out for him in particular.
Yeah, he could get behind the defense once or twice, and that could be all she wrote, knowing Steelers offense and how much trouble they're having connecting down the field. So let's go ahead and go on to our keys to success, and we'll give our game predictions, and we will sign off here for this week. Offensively, Shayne, what do Steelers need to do to emerge victorious? This, like I said, this is a big game. The loser could potentially drop back like way far in the AFC playoff picture, because there are 6 teams that are all tied with that 7-6 record. It's all going to come down to tiebreakers here with some of these. And so I thoroughly believe that a team like the Bills is far more dangerous than either of these two teams, but they're sitting two spots,
tiers of tiebreakers down.
Behind the playoff race because of tiebreakers right now, but that can change in a hurry depending on the results in week 15. So that's why this game is so big for the Steelers. At the end of the day, I'm kind of in that boat where it's like, all right, I don't think the Steelers can do a blasted thing if they were to make the postseason this year. So it could be in their best interest to kind of lose out, change regimes, shift gears here. I know nobody likes to hear that. You'll get fans out there saying, you never root for a Steelers loss. And I understand that. My mindset is more future minded. I'm thinking, what can this team do to get back into Super Bowl track? Not to make the playoffs for a naive chance of going to the Super Bowl. I mean, can you imagine the Steelers against the 49ers if they were to make it that far?
Listen,
so we've seen it once and it wasn't pretty. And so it could be worse.
It's only gotten worse.
Steelers have only gotten more injured. They've gotten healthier. So I don't think that's a matchup that I would be for seeing. But anyway, going down a rabbit hole here, key to success on offense, Shayne.
Yeah, offensively, I personally think the only way this game ends up with a win is for the Steelers if the end of the game we look at the stat sheet and we've run the ball 50 plus times. I don't want Trubisky to have to do anything other than what he absolutely has to do. Like, if you put the ball in his hands more than like 30 times, I think we're going to lose. And I know that sounds for an NFL quarterback to say that. That's how bad it's been for him. Like, it's been truly horrendous for him in his limited action this year. And it is limited action. So I'm not saying like he can't go out there and have a game that he plays well. I just don't see it right now. I don't think he sees it either, quite literally. It's really hard to say anything other than that. Like, you have to just run the football. You have to find a way to do that. You have to stay ahead of the chains. You have to ask him to do very little. If you can do all that and get 17 plus points, you'll have a shot, because the defense is banged up as it is. We're always going to be in games. It's how we do it. I think that's probably the only way that you can have success. I don't see them winning any other way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's going to obviously take a better game from Trubisky than what we've seen
You still
dating
have to
back to
play
last
better when he
year.
does throw, yes, but
So he needs to play
yeah,
more like he did against the Bucks or early last season, where he kind
yeah,
of was able to show something there, and that's what got fans thinking. No, I mean, take care of the ball. I mean,
yeah,
this is one of those games where this is essential. You can't lose the turnover battle and win to a game. Believe it or not, the Colts are 8th in the NFL in scoring. They're averaging 24.2
yes,
points
they've
per
been a
game, I
very,
believe. And
very
so,
solid offense, yeah.
yep, they've been solid. They've been far more efficient than what the Steelers have. And so I believe this is probably going to be one of those games you're going to have to score 20 plus. Realistically, with the injuries Steelers have on defense, can you do it with 20? That's gonna be the question, because I don't know if Steelers can go higher than that, Shayne, with their current state here. So we'll see. Maybe they'll surprise us this week. But take care of the football, and I think it's not an or thing; it's an and thing. Take care of the football, and you need to make some big plays as well. And if you can't do
Yeah,
that in the passing game, the running game's going to stall against this
yeah.
defense, and you're just not going to be able to get anything going. Defensively, Shayne, what does Steelers have to do to come away victorious?
Um, don't let whatever happened against the Patriots happen to start the week, start the game. The start the defense had last week was truly horrendous in almost every way possible, and that was before they got injured more, right? Like that's the thing
Mhm.
that really gets me is like KZ had some really rough moments, especially that touchdown to Henry, the one they threw down the field. Like he was just barely not able
Yeah.
to make the play there. Like I think defensively, ultimately, the pass rush might be an issue, especially if Watt and Highsmith aren't able to play. The secondary has to step up and guard these guys, and they haven't shown that they can do that much this year outside of Joey. Someone has to make a play. Someone has to step up and force a turnover or two, I think, to give this team a chance,
Mhm.
because the Colts do score, like you said, about 24 points a game. They can't get to 24 points. If you let them get to 24, the game is over. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like you can't say anything more than that at this point. You can hope for more than that, but that's real. That's where this team is. Once the team scores 20 plus, the game is probably over realistically. So do not let them get to that point. You have to keep the red zone defense has to be strong. They're missing Taylor, but Moss has been really good for them. The backup running back, he's still one of the leading rushers in the league just because of his hot start to start the
Mhm.
year. Like you have to be able to buckle down and not allow points. And whether that's through turnovers, whether it's through red zone defense standing strong, one of those two or both realistically have to be really good in this game.
Yeah, and I didn't think we'd be living in a world, Shane, where we'd say it is unrealistic to think that it's actually unrealistic to think the Steelers would score more than 20 points
Yeah,
in a
it's
football
not.
game at this point,
Can't
because
expect
it's
it.
just not the trend. I mean, they're at 14 points a game with Faulkner so far, and 15 and a half on the season if you exclude their defensive touchdowns. And so this team doesn't hit that threshold very often. Defensively, Shane, I want them to just not get nickeled and dimed down the field. I know that's kind of their mentality is kind of the opposite, the bend but don't
Yeah,
break when you're in the red zone.
exactly.
I'd rather make Minshew beat me down the field, honestly, because it's
It gives you a shot.
I think it's just going to be too easy. I think it's going to look like the Arizona game and like Zappy did early in the Patriots game, where there's just everything is open underneath. Like you got to play up, be aggressive. If you get beat once or twice down the field, then you hope you hold in the red zone. But I will take my chance with that. I would put Porter on Pittman and hope that matchup goes well. And I like Porter in that. I think that Porter can handle his own. But I think that you just can't get nickeled and dimed down the field, because that's what happened this past game. It's what happened the last two games. And so I think that if you're able to prevent that from happening, maybe get them off the field a little bit earlier, give yourself the time of possession battle, and maybe things can go their way. Game predictions, Shane, and then we'll sign off for today. How do you see this one going? I know that the Colts are slight favorites. If this game was played in Pittsburgh this week, because of how Vegas does a 3-point line, the Steelers would be half-point favorite or a pick 'em in this contest. So do you think that they're going to emerge victorious?
Unfortunately, I do not. I think that this is going to be the first step into them firmly being out of the playoff race and having to reconcile with that, and hopefully lead to some amount of change down the stretch. I have the Colts winning 24-13. I think they're going to get their 24-ish points they normally score. I think this defense, with the injuries and with possibility of Highsmith and Watt being out, is an average defense instead of the above average defense they are overall. So you get your average score. I think they get to their 24 points roughly, and the offense cannot do anything about it to try to make it a game personally.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to bet on this team right now. And despite Tomlin's reputation, never having a losing season, whatever, I think the Steelers are dropping to 7-7 after this one. I think they go 500 and potentially below that for that first time. And so when you're going to be outmatched at quarterback, you're going to be outmatched on the offensive line, you're going to be outmatched basically all around. And if Watt and Highsmith aren't healthy and firing off the ball, that's just one other thing that's not going to go your way this game.
Yeah.
I like the Colts in this one. I think the Colts are going to win 23-16. And until I see the Steelers show some signs of life on offense, if they can't hold this point or this team to 16 points or under, there's no reason to think the Steelers have a good chance of winning this. And I don't think that they'll be able to do that, unfortunately. So those are Shayne and I's predictions for week 15 for the Steelers. Unfortunately, we both have them dropping to 7-7 on the season,
which means they'll probably win.
Which means they'll probably win because we've been kind of backwards on that.
It's pretty much,
It's been a weird year that way. So let us know what you guys think in the comments on this video. We are here every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. I will be taking a week off during Christmas. But we'll be back after the new year. We're set to go, though, I believe, for next week. So come join us live at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time for the Steel Curtain podcast. Thank you for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcast. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain podcast. And thanks for joining us today on the Steel Curtain podcast.